Shalagadoola, metricaboola, bibbidi bobbidi boo. Put them together, and what have you got? Bibbidi bobbidi boo.
Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, continuing to talk with David Mamet, whose brand new book, The Disenlightenment, is a fabulous read, as I've said. But if you don't get it early, you might find it's banned in some places. David, it's good to talk to you again. I want to begin by asking you, how in the world did you learn about the rule against perpetuities?
That's very interesting. You know, my dad was a one-horse lawyer, and I would always go to his office, and I would do filing for him. He had this thing called Commerce Clearinghouse reports. I would do the filing of all these reports. He was a labor lawyer, and I really loved reading them. I really loved reading about law. And I found it fascinating. And then I read a whole lot of Victorian literature. And a lot of the late Victorian literature, Wilkie Collins, not so much, to a certain extent, Dickens, but Wilkie Collins and Mary Elizabeth Braddon, and especially Anthony Trollope, has to do with legal cases. And so there were all of these obscure terms that I love reading dictionaries. So I would write them down and look into them.
Oh, well, it was a horrific experience for me because that's first year property law. And that took me right back to 1981. And I thought, my God, how does David Mamet know about the rule against perpetuity, which is always tested and never used? Let me begin by talking with you about your hometown on page 62. Delightful book, but it is going to be banned. So let's talk about the part that won't be banned. D. Them Does. There's a book of essays, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But you open up, my small South Side Chicago neighborhood gave us Larry Ellison of Oracle, Seymour Hersh of the New York Times, Sherry Lansing, who ran Paramount Pictures just over the color line, Shelby Steele, and Malcolm X, and the blues, and skyscrapers, and improv, and great literature. But you're going to have to add now, David Mamet, in addition to, and Pope Leo XIV from Bronzeville, a suburb of Dolton, St. Mary of the Assumption. Is that near where you grew up?
No, it's not. But my stepmother's lived for years across the street on Astor Street from the Cardinals office. So I said, dude, you know, your next door neighbor just got elected Pope. But apparently he never actually lived in that Cardinals office.
Okay. I just thought it was great that we have a Chicagoan as Pope. I know we are not co-religionists, but I thought it was great. My only disagreement with you in this book comes on page 235, where you say, I caught the wave at the top, meaning American culture, the year you were born. I'm a couple of years older than you. I think the best year to have been born in is in 1956, because Vietnam was not an issue for me, and my colleges were not riot scenes when I got to campus there in 1974. Do you think I caught the wave, or did you catch the top of the wave?
Well, you know, those of us who think that we were lucky enough to be born into the time we were born into are that lucky. If we think we are, certainly we are.
Yeah, I found it. You're grateful, by turns grateful and alarmed in this collection of essays. And now where I turn, I'm not shining you on. I spent a year with Montaigne's essays as a senior in college, and it finally hit me. This is a series of essays, and I don't know if you ordered them with particular care as Montaigne did, or if you did them in order of dashing them off. Which is it, David Mamet?
No, it's certainly the first. I mean, in addition to doing a lot of rewriting on all of these essays, well, with great help from my assistant and colleague editor Pam Suzamel, the next step is to put them in order, because it's you know, Francois Truffaut said a movie should have a beginning, middle, and end, but not necessarily in that order. But he was absolutely wrong, because the audience is going to perceive it as a beginning, middle, and end, even if you don't. So you might as well get the wind at your back and use the way that they perceive to help them and to help you.
Well, what I enjoyed about it so much was moving in and out of your experience as a director and a writer, and then your political observations, and quite a lot about Jews in America and Jews around the world. So to use your own language, you're the protagonist in this book, and I'm trying to work through, as the reader, the through line, as you call it, as to what you are doing. Are you an artist honoring Donald Trump? Are you an American Jew trying to jolt some of your tribe out of the trance they're in American politics? A word dancer showing off. Is it your reaction to the election incomprehension, you say, working through that incomprehension? Or is it all the above, David Mamet?
Well, we have two great American philosophers, the two greatest philosophers of the 20th century. One was, of course, Daffy Duck, who famously encapsulated, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And Daffy Duck said, Faye, what's going on here anyway? So that's the question of philosophy. And the other great philosopher, of course, was the Walt Disney Dr. Seuss. Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss, who wrote a book called And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, which I grew up with. It was one of his first successes. And this guy's going down along the street, and then he sees a cart, and then the cart has got a donkey, and the donkey's got a midget on it, and the midget's got a hat with a thing on it, and it keeps getting more and more and more. So this book is a compilation of and an homage to those two great philosophers. What's going on here? And to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. Mulberry Street being the American century.
But it is jagged, David. There are parts that are very optimistic, and then there are parts which are just completely pessimistic. I want to do the optimistic first. In your essay about the movie Gandhi, you kind of intimate that as the Indians, with Gandhi's leadership, told the British Raj, it's time for you to leave, is the American electorate telling the left and the Islamists it's time for them to leave? Do you think we've reached that point, a tipping point in which we just collectively say, as we did in 2024, thank you for your services, they're no longer needed, and they will be exited off of the political stage?
Well, yes, the one certainly that the American people have said resoundingly, that's enough now. Thanks a lot. Or as we used to say in show business, I love you, honey, but the season's over. So there's that. But are they going to shuffle off the stage? No, of course, whoever does. And as Victor Davis Hanson said immediately after the election, yes, they were beaten. They're going to have to be beaten a few more times before they realize that if enough people tell you you're dead, lay down and die.
Do you think the trans issue is the issue on which the hill on which they will repeatedly choose to die, which isn't an 80-20 issue. It's not a 90-10 issue. I don't even think it's a 95-5 issue, though. The volume set makes the 5 sound a lot louder than 5. Do you think that's the issue that will break it?
No, I think it's the economy. I think the rest of it are just impossible. Here's what's happening is the left, of course, has chased its tail into making demands which are not only onerous, but absurd and blasphemous. And it's no wonder that they don't like religion, because what they've done is they created a new religion, having all the forms of the old religions, the Judeo-Christian religion, but worshiping Satan rather than God, if I may.
I think you're right. By the way, former Attorney General Bill Barr argued at length in his memoir, One Damn Thing After Another, that the secular left has become a religion and its indoctrination ought to be banned in every public school in the same way that the indoctrination of Roman Catholicism is. Okay, things I learned in the book. The Breen office administered the Motion Picture Code from 1934 to 1968. Married couples had to be in twin beds. The shift to good, clean fun produced 30 years of drivel. That's in a footnote on page 153. Did it really last until 1960? I don't remember it lasting until 1968.
Well, I don't know which of their particular strictures lasted the longest, but the office was in power. And if you look at pre-code films before the Motion Picture Code 1934, most films are garbage, right? Because if you turn out a bunch of nothing but sausages, it's going to be very hard to get a magnificent sausage. Maybe a small chef's going to come up and sneak in and take out the pesticides and put in some actual beef. But most films are garbage. But the particular flavor of garbage that the pre-code films were not subject to was sycophancy and sententiousness. That came in to a large extent after the motion picture codes. And what that did was that said to everybody involved, well, we need your complicity in a falsehood. The, so if the falsehood is that married couples don't sleep together, it's easy to cross-deck that in if we accept that into another falsehood, right? That for example, that later on that there were good Nazis, or for example, later on that the American is racist. I mean, of course, America is racist, but it's not anymore. But we still
Yeah.
see the result of that.
Well, your
So look,
take
and
on the left
if
on
you go ahead, you talk.
well, okay. I was going to say you repeat. I don't know much about the code, but anti-Semitism is all around us. Last week in Washington D.C., where I am, 2 young Jews were murdered in cold blood by a kid from Chicago. And so I'm wondering, did the code prohibit anti-Semitism at any time, to your knowledge?
I don't know. I think that that us Jews were so far below the radar that that I don't actually see much anti-Semitism in, excuse me, in the early movies. What I do see very much, especially as you get into the period after World War II, is accommodation through supposedly philo-Semitic films. For example, Exodus and Fiddler on the Roof and Gentleman's Agreement, which are kind of the equivalent of affirmative action for Jews, saying, you know, I guess you're people too. What the real answer to the end of racism, which you see now, is it's none of your frickin' business. Leave me alone.
Yes. There's a chapter, an essay in here, where you're attending a meeting with other LA Jews, and people are IDF soldiers are talking to you, and you say the problem is not them, the problem is us. Do you think you will wake anybody up from the drudgery of the self-absorption of American Jewry, which voted 79% for Biden and Harris, which, as you remark frequently, is suicidal for Jews?
No, because as you know, anybody wants to get some wisdom, I suggest they read the Bible because that's the wisdom of the human condition. It's all there. And as Dennis Prager said, he doesn't believe in the Bible because of God. He believes in God because of the Bible, because it's all in there. And if you look at the 20%, uh, that's exactly, curiously, the same percentage of Jews that left Egypt in the Exodus. 80% stayed behind. They preferred
Oh,
slavery, which is the same thing, which is exactly what we see today in the 80% of the American Jews voting for their own destruction. Jews who vote Democratic are in effect queers for Palestine.
that is repeatedly showing up in here in a couple of different places. I was with breakfast with this morning downtown with a pretty significant figure in the movement, and I said, and I had your book with me. I was finishing up the outline. I said I had no idea. I've interviewed David a couple of times. I had no idea he was a constitutionalist, and I would direct people to page 58, the Constitution. It is the practical wisdom of men of the world, distilled from the combined experience of self-supporting farmers, merchants, professional men, and soldiers. Its rules exist not to coerce citizens, but to restrict government. They are, in their original form, bright, definite lines which the government must not cross. And I have taught common law for 30 years, and it's the rules of golf. Everyone can learn it, written by farmers for farmers. It's not complicated. Do you think many Americans think it is complicated wrongly, David?
I don't think many Americans think about the Constitution, and I think that 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 the the right, the conservative movement, is is a return to constitutional values, whether you call them that or not. Look at somebody said to Rabbi Hillel, "Can you tell me the whole Torah while standing on one foot?" And he stood on one foot and said, "What's hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. Now go study." So that's what the Constitution comes down to the overwhelming majority that voted for a return to constitutional government, whether they know it or not. What they were demanding as human beings and as Americans and as workers and citizens was, if what's hateful to you, don't do to me. Leave me alone. So that's
Whether
what the
they know it or
Constitution.
not is the operative question.
Yeah.
I want to point out, you're right, that you or I could not perhaps imagine the operation or makeup of a return to constitutional democracy is understandable. That Trump and his supporters did it is an instance of extraordinary intellectual courage. I don't think I've seen that read or written anywhere that voting for Trump required intellectual courage. Would you expand on that?
Yes, I didn't indicate primarily that it was an act of courage on the part of the people who voted for him, although it was. What I'm suggesting, what I'm stating is an instance of courage on his part, because he was looking at and obviously he had forebears, not only in the first American Revolution, but also starting with the Tea Party movement and Rush and those people who came out,
Yes.
those housewives in the Middle West in Chicago said, wait a second, that Trump looked around and saw something which the rest of us, and I'm getting into the final boarding process here, will say, well, it's terrible, but perhaps in some form it will last my time. And this guy looked at the whole thing and said, no, wait a second, you got it wrong. It's the Gordian knot, but it can be untied if we have courage. And so it was his courage and his determination that attracted the like-minded to him, not only his cabinet, but 80 million Americans who said, my God, I didn't realize, I know it had gotten that bad, but I didn't realize that it was possible to address these problems one by one and by opposing, or as Shakespeare says, or take arms against the sea of trouble, and by opposing, end them. So it's extraordinary intellectual courage on moral courage on this in this guy's part. And I remember I heard that Melania, before they came down when he first said he was thinking of running for president, she said, please, please don't do it, Donald. He said, why not? And she said, because if you do it, you'll win. So these are extraordinary people, and I feel so fortunate to have them in position of leadership, not of my life, but of the government.
One observation you made, I don't have a particular page cite, is that the debate revealed Biden, in his essence, incognate, without will, energy, perhaps even the capacity to be president, and that the assassination attempt on Trump revealed Trump at his essence, fight, 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 courageous and willing to move forward. I think that's going to be picked up by Team Trump and used. Have you lost friends, by the way, because you've said nice things about Trump?
Well, I thought they were friends. I turned a lot of friends into acquaintances. Thank you. I turned a lot of friends into acquaintances and a lot of acquaintances into antagonists and enemies. But, what the hell?
Did you pick up any along the way? Any new friends who are actually artists?
Yes, a few friends who are actually artists, and a lot of friends who aren't artists but are actual human beings. And these are the people that I want to be with. It's like people said, someone in one of Edith Wharton's essays, somebody said that the young woman said she wanted to break into society, and Edith said, why?
Why?
Right? So why? Yeah, why? There's nobody there. So who do you want for your friends? People who've gone around for years saying, well, this may not be politically correct, but, which was the opening wedge in the wokeism, right? Or I hope I don't offend it. My friends now, my colleagues and my associates and and the co-religionaries who devoted to conservative values, which are Judeo-Christian values, are people that are standing with me, and I'd stand with them. I mean,
the one person you don't mention in the book at all that I regret, and I want your thoughts on him, Mitch McConnell elected Donald Trump, though neither want to admit it, because Mitch McConnell held open the vacancy that Justice Scalia's death created, and that issue propelled Trump over the top in 2016. Now they've fallen out, and it's irreconcilable. But one could not be the other without one having been the other. It's really they're linked forever.
Well, here's something I was reading in the commentary, a Chabad commentary on the Torah. He's talking, and the guy says, talking about God, right? And he says the guy's late for work and he's looking for a parking space, and it's his first day at work. And if he's late on his first day, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. He can't find a parking space, God, he says, God, I've never asked you for anything before. I need a parking space. Just as he says that, the guy in front of him pulls out and there's a parking space right in front of the office. He says, thanks, God, don't forget about it. I found one.
That's actually that is McConnell and Trump. Well said. There are various unfortunate iterations of anti-Semitism in here. Before we take our break, I just want to bring up one. Jonathan Glazer at the Academy Awards was the perfect example of when you've run out of sexy diseases to champion, crack open the toolkit and take out the all-purpose tool, which is anti-Semitism. Getting worse or getting better?
Oh, it's getting much worse. It's getting much, much worse. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, imagine,
pause right there.
Harvard.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll tell you. I'll talk to you later.
All right.
Off you go.
Pause back. We'll be back with you at... Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt in the Beltway. I have been talking for the past half hour with David Mamet, one of, if not the equal of any of America's great playwrights, about his brand new and wonderful, delightful new book, The Disenlightenment. It will be condemned. It may be banned, but it's a hell of a read, and David is still with me, and I'm very grateful for that. David, you mentioned repeatedly through The Disenlightenment that your racket is the stage, the theater, 70 episodes of television, writing generally, and that's great. But you threaten my racket because you say on page 137, anyone encouraged to talk at great length will eventually reveal himself as inconsistent, foolish, or mistaken. This is the operation of both the celebrity interview and a criminal interrogation. If too many people read that, I'm not going to get many guests.
No, you're doing great. And P.S., I look at all the people on Fox, they're an extraordinary array of talent, and their knowledge and concision and self-control is it's certainly beyond me. I have nothing but admiration for them. And you.
Britt Hume set the standard. Brett Baer keeps it every day. And you're right. I like working with these people because they're all professional in doing the news. Let me talk about three subjects in our last 10 minutes. A is education. You observed on page 66 of The Disenlightenment, to have failed to prepare for the test is the bad dream of the Western child. The horrifying test historically was factual or practical, regurgitate the capital of Prussia, or deal with the 2 trains leaving Chicago. Today's school child is taxed, it seems, neither recall nor to reason, but to assent. You're right, but you're also an optimist that we can change that. Why are you an optimist we can change that?
Well, because I've been very involved with education all my life. In my young life as a failure and as a ne'er-do-well, and later as a fellow who founded a couple of theaters and acting schools. And it all comes down to, the education is pretty simple. What are you actually teaching? When do you know when you've learned it? And can you do it? What are the signposts along the way? Kids go to college for 8 years to take French, and they can't order a cup of coffee. I mean, so what we've done is institutionalize that through the teachers union and the elite universities, where kids are told that actual learning, that's to say actual marketable ability, is beside the point, and what they're supposed to do is in effect protest or fight to stand around and scream, because they've been asked to do, they haven't, the reason that they're screaming is they haven't been asked to do anything. So that makes children very, very, very nervous. If a child doesn't know the rules, the child is either going to become morose and ingrown, or they're going to become the bad seed and say, well, hell, if nobody else in charge, I guess I better be. That's a dysfunctional family, and that's a dysfunctional educational system. That's a dysfunctional country. So the answer is to get government out of education. You know, how much time does a kid actually need to sit in a classroom listening to some idiot read from a book and call it school? The great thing about the internet,
by the way, you provide the greatest concise example of how to teach with your flea market and $5 example. People have to read Disenlightenment to learn how to be a creative writer. But that's genius, David, and people are going to have to read it. But I want to go to B, Trump. You write a lot about Trump in the book. You write about lawfare from pages 111 to 114. Were you aware at the time of what a charade Juan Merchan was running, what a joke Alvin Bragg was, what a carnival it all became? Were you aware of it at the start?
Of course I was, and it's much, much worse than that. It was a coup, and it was a coup that succeeded, and they tried everything, including arguably putting him on the spot and letting him get shot. This guy was treated worse, is treated certainly treated as badly as Dred Scott or the Japanese under the Korematsu decision. He was treated as an enemy that must be destroyed, and we're seeing it still today by dehumanizing Trump. He's got to be Hitler, dehumanizing by dehumanizing people, which is the trick of the Marxist. They aren't human beings, therefore we can do whatever we want to them.
Yeah, David, I've interviewed him 30 times, and he has a unique way of talking. Have you figured out how he talks yet? Do you listen? Do you know him? I should preface it. Have you actually sat down and spoken with him?
I haven't sat down and spoken with, but I talked to him on the phone a couple of times when he was still in the movie business, and he called me up, the entertainment. He called me up the day after I did Bill Maher the last time. He was on Bill Maher the last time, and Bill leads off and says, "I know you're conservative and blah blah blah, but do you actually believe that the election was stolen?" So I waffled a little bit. I said, well, I don't know. I can't remember what I said, but it wasn't very courageous on my part. Next morning, the phone rings. Person says, "Are you available for the president?" And I'm thinking, why would Biden call me? And it's Donald Trump. He says, "David," he said, "I saw you on Bill Maher. I thought you were great, but you know that election was stolen. You know it
Ha!
was." I said, "Mr. President, uh, you know what? You're right." He says, "Yeah, and let me bring you up. Let me tell you why." And so he talked for like 10 minutes, walking me through the thing, and he was absolutely right. I wussied out on that on the subject. But I was flattered, very flattered that he called me.
But you listen to people and then you put it back up on stage. I was listening last night after I finished the Disenlightenment to Speed the Plow, the Jeffrey Goldberg version, which is on um, Apple iBooks. I was just listening to Dougie Wood, and I was thinking, you listen to how people talk. I don't know if you could replicate how Trump talks. Do you think you could?
No, I don't think I could. Oh, listen. Speaking of listen, I just did a new movie with Shia LaBeouf,
Oh,
and I think you're gonna like it. It's called Henry Johnson, and it's available. Uh, I, I don't know. It's wherever the hell is Instagram. It's called HenryJohnsonMovie.com, and I know you liked The Anarchist very much, and that's being said.
very
I think you'll
much.
like Henry
Oh, I
Johnson.
will watch Henry Johnson then. I'll find the platform. Last couple of
Thank you.
minutes on the essay most disturbing. What shall we give the sun god? Our generation, your and mine, was the first to grow up with the threat of instant annihilation. Our children and grandchildren are the first to grow up with instant global communication, which that combination produces fear and fury. Where's it going?
Well, who knows? I mean, as our friends the Muslims say, it was all written in the mind of Allah long ago, and that's true. But it's going where it's going. But Rebecca West said something interesting. She said all great social upheavals are caused by a change in climate, and I think there's a great deal of wisdom in that. But not because of quote climate change, which is a complete fiction, but because the changes in agriculture, blah blah, and the shift in population. But what I see is that the hugest changes in civilization have been caused by technology. The first was the industrial revolution in the 19th century, and the next, which is just as destructive, is the computer revolution in the last 40 years, which has it's changed everything. So everything that was based on methods of production, methods of communication, methods of employment, therefore methods of education, has just gone out the window, and people are freaking terrified. And some of them are not terrified and say, okay, let's figure it out. They're called conservatives. And some of them are running around like the sky is falling, and they're saying, who is to blame? Who is to blame? Oh, it obviously is the Jews, and it's Trump, and it's the sexism, and blah, 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 blah. But the fact is that things have vastly changed. And so what the left is looking at is like they live on the Erie Canal, and
Huh.
railroads have come in.
Yeah, I saw Mission Impossible, the final reckoning last night. You called Maverick Top Gun the death rattle of the movies in the Disenlightenment. All that Mission Impossible, the final reckoning is the Cuban Missile Crisis with better stunts. And I think that I think that's true. It's the Cuban Missile Crisis. Do you think the Cuban Missile Crisis would have turned out the same had the internet been around? Because I don't. I think the missiles would have launched because of the pressure from X.
I really don't know. It's like saying, hey, what would Spartacus have done if he had a Piper Cub, you know?
David Mamet, you have spent 45 minutes with me. Thank you so much for doing that. The Disenlightenment is a joy. What's the Henry Johnson dot com?
Yeah.
Henry Johnson
movie. No,
Henry Johnson movie. I will go and watch that. Thank you for spending time, and thank you for agreeing to talk to Ben Domenech. He's thrilled. He's coming by to get the book from me tomorrow to read it, but mine is so marked up, I don't know if he'll be able to make any sense out of it. Thank you for your time, David. I hope I see you on the West Coast soon, and I'll tell you what I think about henryjohnsonthemovie.com after I've watched it. Be well.
It's a pleasure to see you again. Thank you.